Welcome to another episode of Talking in Stations, the EVE Online Weekend Report. I'm Matterall. Today, we're going to review this week's news in EVE Online for both the game and its players. So let's get started. We're going to end up talking about the new, expansion. I don't know if you call it an expansion, but it's a new Triglavian space. Lots happened in 1 week, so it's literally like a long dream. And we're going to cover that and the new quadrant that CCP announced. And we'll also talk about the last few battles that have been just massive. And we'll preview the one that's going to happen today in a few hours. There's another one coming. So if you've missed out, it's a good chance to catch up. Okay, with me today, some of our experts here is Arcia Elkin from Electus Matari, also known as Baleful Dysnomia. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing? How's everybody doing?
We're all good. She covers the Empire Space, invasions, role-playing, and a bunch of stuff for us. But today she's really going to specialize on Triglavian stuff that she knows a ton about. Also with us, you may recognize him from our live streaming team. This is Sully. He is from Razor. Say hi, Sully.
Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Good. And of course, McLeod's with us today. Our
Hello.
engineer from Initiative. All right, so Elise couldn't make it today. He'll be back next week. Wow, there is a lot to talk about. Arcia, let's you and I talk about the Triglavians first.
So as everybody probably knows, after that whole ordeal at the beginning of the week with the gates flickering, they went offline, the regions were disconnected, and after the patch, it reemerged as the new Triglavian region of Pakven. So all the previously liminal systems that were won by the Triglavians in the Empire space has been turned into its own region with standings locked gates in between each of the systems, and a few new types of wormholes that generate dynamic enemies throughout the systems as a way to get in. So there's a lot of new kinds of enemies, new kinds of drifters, and new kinds of like rogue drones, like rogue drone super carriers are in the region. And there's specific ways to get the different kind of enemies in the region to spawn. So like, and they have to do with the wormholes. So like, one of the new types of wormholes they open specifically to drone regions, and they spawn on the side of null. So a wormhole will spawn in the drone regions, and if somebody goes in a Triglavian wormhole, they look like drifter wormholes. So when you warp to it, you don't land on 0 like a normal wormhole. You land at 70, and there's like enemies on the outside. And if you jump in, it says on the show info to Triglavian space. You jump in, it opens up into one of the Triglavian systems, and then if you're coming from the drone regions, rogue drone enemies start spawning on the other side of the wormhole in the Triglavian space, and if you fight them, they'll escalate upwards to the rogue drone supercarriers. Likewise, if the wormhole comes from Anoikis from wormhole space, drifters and sleepers spawn on the other side of the wormholes in Triglavian space, and they escalate as well up to the Doomsday using drifters. There's a lot of new drifters that don't use the Doomsday to begin with. If the wormhole comes from Empire space from higher Losak, Eden comrades spawn on the other side of the wormhole, and I don't shoot those, so I don't know what they escalate to. So the new types of wormholes have a lot to do with the new types of enemies in Pakven and how they spawn. Additionally, on the other side of the wormhole in high, low, or null, wormholes, Triglavians will spawn and harass people in the systems that they spawn in. So these new types of wormholes are connected with the new types of enemies you encounter in the regions, for one.
Cool. Let me make some adjustments here. We have Uriel with us. Uriel, what's your full name? Because it's kind of hard for me to remember.
It's hard for him to remember.
Paradisi, and Tavnoichi. You can just say Uriel, though, please. Please just say Uriel.
Will do. So Uriel is, I mean, you specialize in a lot of things, but it's a lot of the backstory is what you are very familiar with, and especially some Triglavian stuff, right?
I'd say I started Eve, and I immediately got interested in all the Jove lore, basically. You know, all those spooky guys. Them and the Drifters are definitely my main focus, and then from that I extended into the Triglavians as they came up, because they and the Drifters are sort of part of an intimately entangled story.
Right. So for those that aren't familiar, Uriel is often referenced by other players and CCP about the backstory and interpretations of it. And are you the one that's translated Triglavian text?
That was me also. No, sorry, okay. It wasn't me who translated all of it. So Arc, as the messages were coming out originally from the when you had the big drifter death balls kind of spawning and all over the place, we would go there with 100 people in coercers, pop them, and in those you would get a little vault item that would not actually open up to anything, but it would have literally a URL, and going to that link would take you to a spooky little video.
I remember
and
those
as we
sorry.
yeah, no, it's fine. And as we were messing with those, we saw that there were, weird letters and stuff, and we're like, all right, what is this? And we started looking at that, and someone eventually figured out that, oh, this is a URL. So from that, we started figuring out just exactly what it said. And then we had a lot more of those show up over time. And as we got more of those, we figured out more letters, et cetera, et cetera. We built up the alphabet. And I took the initiative to basically make a chart of the alphabet altogether. So that's the thing that you'll see that people credit me for, and that is my work. Yeah. That nice, pretty looking blue one.
That's amazing, the work that you guys did. We'll talk more about that in a second. The last adjustment we're making to the show is Tiberius, our wormhole specialist, is coming in just a second. He recently had a show yesterday on Triglavian space in relationship to wormholes, so he'll be in just a minute. Thanks for joining us late, Uriel. I'm sorry about the last. We gave him very late notice here, and he's obliging us by coming in and hanging out with us to talk about all these massive changes.
Hey, so, I'm already hanging out playing Eve. I might as well.
Anyway, to continue about the new space. Unlike before it moved, it is no longer fake null, and it's kind of like more similar to wormhole space where you can bubble. And I've heard. I've bubbled myself, but I've heard secondhand reports booshing and bombing works even in the previous high-sec systems. What doesn't work is you can't light a Sino, but what does work is that I've heard that you can bridge out from Triglavian space to surrounding low and null sec. So you have basically unscoutable blops or titans that can bridge out to low and null sec nearby where these systems used to be, which is kind of a big deal. In some of them, because some of them are decently placed. Some aren't really in range of anything that seems too much of a big deal, but some of these systems can hit some interesting places, especially like Scarcon, which is at the edge of Molten Heat that leads into like Ethereum Reach and such. And obviously you could only pre-stage a Titan if it was a previously low-sec system like Scarcon or Archie. So like only a few of those is applicable, but there definitely are Titans that were pre-staged in this space.
Wow! So you'll be able to. That's a huge thing. I know you're going to continue, but that one thing is something we were wondering about all week, and so you've just solved that for us. So you can jump out of these systems into known space systems.
Yeah, and obviously it's easy to move a Blobson compared to like a Titan. So that's something that you have to have in the back of your mind if you're in range of where one of these systems used to be, right? Additionally, there are sites with the new ores. Can you move? Honestly, I don't want to give an answer. Is you can move a Titan through a Trig gate because I don't have a Titan there and I haven't had a chance to try, right? I assume it's just like a Stargate, so probably, but that's just an assumption. Yeah, it obviously doesn't fit through the wormholes in because they're max jump mass of 300 million, which is like an orca, or you can roll them really easy because we were rage rolling them every time we found them to try to get wormholes into a specific system for something. So they're very, very small wormholes. It's hard to get a full fleet through them. But the gates do just seem to be normal stargates. Besides the standing lock, you warp to it, you land on top of it at 0, and you jump. Right. So, I would assume gate mechanics between the systems are just like gates. Otherwise, there's all the new ore sites with ore, like the Triglavian ores, and also like nullsec ores. You can mine like spod there, and there are world arcs that spawn. World arcs are a source of the Zoria's officer mods and a lot of loot and salvage. Very profitable to do. Obviously, that does hurt your Triglavian standing if you fight the world arc, but depending on how you get in, where you find a world arc, maybe you don't care.
I will say I haven't seen any world arcs in my time in Trig space so far.
I have. I've seen 2. I've seen
All right.
2 in the because I can actually take the gates because there was the window where you could get a lot of standing from the rogue drone sites when the patch first came out. So there was these rogue drone anomalies. Rogue drone anomalies used to have, they still have structures, but they used to give decent trig standing when the patch first came out.
Decent is underplaying it a little, I think.
No, honestly, like they used to give good trig standing, right? It was like 0.24 and
basically per
0.24 minus for rogue drones, adjusted down to whatever percentage for trigs.
So to say how that kind of affected things, the Triglavian character I played, I ended up getting to about 3.0 trig standings over the course of like 6 months. And in the span of a day, I was able to push one character from minus 0.44 with them to over 7.0.
And
so that's why CCP messed with that.
I was able to go from negative 5.5 to positive 5.5 in 5 hours.
Yeah, that's
with a
that's why it was
retribution.
declared an exploit so quickly compared to some other things CCP has done.
It. But it also ties into some of the outrage that there's been about the area in general, because a lot of the Edencom players especially, but also Triglavians who did like Logi and such and maybe didn't have combat drones out all the time, are very angry about the standing locks on especially the gates. Because from the Edencom perspective, people feel like they interacted with...
Let's clarify. I'm sorry. I wasn't pushing the push to talk. I'm too used to going without it. Let's clarify that point, though, because that's something that came up and it was a big deal. Could grind standing for both Edencom and Triglavians by doing rogue drone missions or doing rogue drone anomalies.
You shot a structure in the rogue drone anomaly. So what people were doing where they were warping to one of the anomalies, shooting a rogue drone wall, warping to the next system, going to an anomaly, shooting a wall, warping to the next system, going to the anomaly, shooting a wall. Essentially
zero risk for better standings than you could get at any other source.
And I was able to get people into this new Triglavian space gameplay because their standing would be high enough they could go in there and do stuff.
They were able to take the gates,
the only thing that the standings locked in terms of mobility was the ability to take gates between the Triglavian systems once you're in the area. You can enter through wormholes normally. It is a giant deal, of course.
Because here's the thing about Triglavian systems. You know, in a wormhole system, every wormhole has static wormholes within the system to lead out of the system, right? So even if you roll a wormhole in a wormhole system, a new static spawns that will always go to low sec or always go to null sec or always go to high sec. Well, these systems, there's wandering wormholes that spawn on the other side. In Trig space, there's only 2 wormholes that seem to spawn in Trig space, and they could be in just any random system. So if you end up in a Trig space system and you can't take the gates, you can't move around. You can't always get out without killing yourself. And you can't always find a way into the system. So if you have something there that you need to defend, you don't have a static wormhole. You might just be out of luck. You might not be able to get people there.
To add to that point, however, the fact that the standings were set for the gates in the first place, and the fact that CCP went to fix the exploit so fast, it feels like that was their plan anyhow.
Right. Okay, but that, again, was considered an exploit a few days ago, and now they've actually fixed it, so you can't do it that way. You can still run drone missions, or I'm sorry, I keep calling it drone missions, but what were they, anomalies?
Drone anomalies.
They were anomalies.
Okay, so everyone was doing them in like high-sec anomalies. Like Arcia said, pop a structure, go to a system, pop another structure. But literally anything in Rogue Drone content that had a structure could be done to do that. So missions, anomalies, whatever, as long as it had a little large collidable structure to shoot and blow up, you would be able to get that standing stick from it.
Okay.
And again, with no combat with actual enemies.
Yeah. So the point that I want to make, though, so for people who want to participate in Triglavian space, you can still do these things. You just can't exploit it like it was being exploited before. And that's been fixed already. So it's not a behavioral thing you have to do. You just have, they've already fixed it, so you can't do it anyway. So you're good to go. Okay. Arcia?
All right. So what was I talking about? The standing. Well, with these standing locked gates, a lot of the Edencom side especially, and a lot of the Logi from the Trig side too, who didn't get the standings, are upset that they feel like their participation in the event, that the whole last 5 months invasion event, was not like rewarded properly per se, because everybody was engaging with this content for whatever reasons they had that they wanted to engage with the content, and now it feels like the next step of the content and the Triglavians to get to continue their story where they're making their own little Trigland, but the Edencom don't get to continue their story with resisting the Triglavians, right? Because even though we pre-set up like a citadel and we did like an expedition to the Triglavian space, and we can't really get people in or out or interact with anything around it, so a lot of people have been sitting in this dead system that has had almost nothing in for the entire time since it was updated to the Pakvan region, and we can't move around without everybody becoming friendly with the Triglavians. We can't continue to resist. We can't continue our story, and it feels like this scripted event where Triglavians were destined to get their own system no matter what happened during the invasion led to a situation where like one side of the arbitrary sides were punished for participating, because now they're worse off than somebody who didn't participate at all as far as the standing grounds goes, whereas the other side was rewarded with the ability to freely move around the region and experience the new content.
Yeah, and I can understand that. Yeah, it's interesting the direction CCP decided to go with that, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the future the gates had the standings disappear, where early on the original intent was that Trig players had a head start on things, having done the invasion stuff. And like you said, even the Logi pilots and stuff, a lot of them didn't get the standings enough. But if you remember the Drifter Hives from way back, which had gated stuff on both sides and needed a fleet to go up both sides, eventually they kind of removed that requirement also. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is sort of an early thing that's happening, and that eventually that might change a little. Frankly, obviously I'm very biased, as I was on the Trig side the whole time anyhow. I'm fine with it the way it is, but I understand how people feel about it, and I think that's totally valid.
Well, the thing is that I think that they should have made it so the gates react to either Triglavian or Edencom standing, either as framed as Edencom's hacking the gates for trusted capsuleers, or that I think it's very Trig that the people fighting against the Trigs also, you've proven yourself as a worthy opponent, come and try to prove yourself in our region, something like that.
Yeah, at least in all about those home systems, of course. I think that would make sense.
It would make sense to lock out just the home systems.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and even so, the home systems are the only ones that require, again, 7.0 standings to pass through the gates into, with the others all being either 3.0 or 1.0.
I do think that I do dislike the idea of standing skated content behind a hell grind in Eve.
Yeah, behind the hell grind is kind of... See, I think part of the reason there was such a huge reaction on both sides is that for the people who, took time to gain standings over the last 6 months, it was a lot of grinding, like a lot. I spent so many hours doing that stuff. And it felt definitely to me and others like a very big kind of slap in the face when the exploit thing came out, because basically I didn't have to do any of this the last 6 months. I could have done it in one day. And that's where the other side of that pain comes from, and the big argument with that.
But as somebody who wants to rage war against the Triglavian players, as somebody who wants to fight the Triglavian players in their home, imagine what it would be like if Goons and Test were fighting, but Test couldn't jump into Delve unless Goons set them blue, and they can't sino there. There's not wormholes. Except for if you find them randomly into the system from another system. Imagine how well that war would be going then.
Yeah, I think even if they keep the standing stuff up, I think they're going to introduce other ways to get in. Obviously, Edencom could go and, create some sort of intercept gates or something, throw a way to get into the systems some other place from. Then you also have stuff like, again, the drifters. They have those drifter hives. They have the Nexus Gate things, which are big broken up things that haven't been iterated on since 2015, and were originally introduced, with some intent for them to lead somewhere. With that, and considering the fact that a lot of people think in the lore those might have been how the drifters entered the Abyss in the first place, perhaps having those specific things work as a way in to the Trig systems, or at least some of them, would be, another possible option. The way I see it is the standings things should stay the way they were. I wish they hadn't had the exploit, but I think they should also introduce alternate ways to get in for people who didn't help the Trigs. And, ways that aren't so...
Let me take a second to introduce a third point of view here. That's Tiberius. He's somebody who dwells in wormholes a lot. He just added a show the Anoikis connection yesterday, so you can check that out. It's two hours of wormhole discussion on this topic as well. How's it going, Tiberius?
Good morning, thanks. Actually, I wanted to touch base. We were talking earlier about the disconnect between the Edencom players and the Triglavian players, how the Triglavian players get to kind of continue the story, whereas the Edencom are kind of set aside. Exuki actually made an interesting point, kind of touching base on this, is that and this even goes back to the fact that Trig space was basically an inevitability at a large respect. Exuki was on CSM 14 and ran and lost in CSM 15, for those who do not know. He basically said that from his perspective, CCP has essentially they've shifted away from the idea that they're going to do where they're going to allow more of a sandbox style play and kind of focus the narrative, so to speak, where they have a vision as to what they want to happen, and they're going to give some agency to the players as to when it's going to happen or where it's going to happen. So, for instance,
such as the map changes with the systems that were dragged into the Abyss.
Right, exactly.
The specifically, probably the biggest one of those.
Right, exactly. So, they give the agency for that, but that's not necessarily what entirely what CCP has. They're not necessarily going to allow a free-formed what's the word I'm looking for here, universe anymore. So
at least in these areas,
right?
With they have a plan for it, obviously.
Right.
I think I agree that seems to be the case, and hearing CSM say that is neat. Also, I miss Exuki. I miss hanging out at the meets he would have, and probably can't do that this year. But anyhow, the way I think the way that's internally supposed to be very much contrasted with the way they marketed the invasion stuff, especially Chapter 3, where it's like, oh, pick your side and fight for your side of the thing. Where they very much pushed, okay, so you can fight for either side. There are two sides to this, where from early on it became pretty obvious that the Trigs were sort of the story progressing side, and Edencom seems like it was kind of created, at least, as sort of just a opposer entity for the content. But then you have all the developers who have said they did not expect to have as much of a influx of people doing the stuff on both sides as they did. That's why a lot of stuff got really weird early on, and numbers were scaled weirdly because, again, they didn't expect that many people. And then you have, people, loyalists on either side. So the Edencom side kind of, in the end, with that direction you said they were kind of going in, kind of inevitably got kind of shafted by it, which I think is really kind of sucks. But yeah.
Well, ultimately, CCP has confirmed that Edencom was made specifically so the Triglavian players could avoid harsher consequences, so they didn't have to take standing hits with the empires themselves.
That makes sense.
So they made like a group of the empires working together that doesn't actually affect the empires themselves. Because imagine it would have been really, really harsh if the Triglavian players couldn't go to high sec at all, right? Like if they killed all those Caldari systems and then couldn't go to Jita without the police attacking them, because that standing is kind of important, right?
Right, yes.
But it seems like from that, they didn't really, I get the impression that they didn't really expect, not just the engagement, which as you said is true, they didn't expect the level of engagement they got, but I get the impression that they didn't expect any organized Edencom groups. They expected locals in the areas of the invasions to fight the Triglavian players.
That's also my take on it, yeah.
They did not expect people to rally behind Edencom and move around, showing up to every invasion in the same way that the Trigs did.
I'll say, to go along with that, I don't think CCP expected the roleplay aspect of things to really come into such major play with this content.
That's
definitely where the Edencom side kind of found their base and expanded from there, yeah.
They definitely didn't expect that. They've, the CCP devs we've been talking to have again and again mentioned that they were very surprised by the roleplay motivated people, which is really, as you said, the base of the Edencom power. Like the Lux Invicta group within Edencom, which was basically Edencom's answer to Zeta Fleet, was pretty much nearly entirely role players. Not entirely role players, but nearly entirely the role-playing groups, like Electus Matari, like Kimi Hadar, like Phoenix Naval Systems, and all that.
Yeah. Like CCP has always known that roleplay type groups exist. I don't think they expected them to come together and also energize others to the extent they did.
Yeah, I think it was completely out of left field, and they should have expected it, but they didn't, maybe, for some reason.
Well, because, reasonably, prior to this, I can only think of a handful of places where roleplay stuff came into play at all, and even fewer places where you had more than a few, again, roleplay and lore-interested people really pushing it for the sake of that. This kind of hasn't happened before, really, in terms of how EVE works.
It's kind of weird, though, that they would encourage people to, quote-unquote, take a side, but not have content on the flip side of the Triglavian stuff. So like on Serenity, for instance, Serenity is almost entirely fortresses. That's pretty much what we've got all of our fortresses.
Triglavian. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, if we had went full Serenity, they would have found a way to make POCFEN happen anyway, because you don't throw a development time. Like you said, it was an inevitability that, it's not like, we hear a lot that the Triglavians won, and that a lot of them say that Edencom players are just salty about that, but like Edencom won more systems, even if you discount the Serenity fortresses that we got.
Yeah, it was literally a battle of attrition. There was no,
it wasn't even that. It was a preordained conclusion. It wasn't a soccer match. It was professional wrestling, and it's like if Vince McMahon, CCP Vince McMahon, gave the belt to drone cold Steve Austin after they defeated the Edencom taker, and then they didn't pay the Edencom taker, right?
That's a very good way of describing it, and I very much like the name you came up with.
No, I came up with all the names, like the drone cold rogue Austin and Triple D, which is Dingle Doodle Drifter dumbass Drifter Dingle Doodle, right? Like, because next it's a triple threat match between the Drifters and the Rogue Drones and the Triglavians.
That's creative. I like that.
Well, Noisy Gamer says, waiting for the Hilmar wrestling memes. And I think Noisy Gamer already gave him the name Hurricane Hilmar, I believe. So there you go, Noisy. All right, so that's kind of the Eden Com
triangle. Got it.
That's the Eden Com like grievance for this new content that's in the game. It's like, hey, we worked hard too, just as hard, if not harder, than our opponents, and they got this whole region, and we're kind of locked out and can't even participate in that region.
I think part of things going forward, the question we're going to have to be searching for an answer for is whether the upper management of CCP will say, all right, this is something worth putting some effort into now in terms of Edencom sided content.
Okay, I'm going to upset you here, but Arcia, you got a whole ship line.
Everybody can fly an Edencom ship. You don't need standings to fly an Edencom ship. Even if they make them the best ships in the game, you can fly an Edencom ship, you can fly a Triglavian ship, no matter what your standing is. That's not neither of those is a reward for anybody.
Yeah, I'm with Arcia there. The whole thing is basically the Triglavian stuff has introduced content that is heavily balanced toward the people who took the Trig side, where there is nothing for that on the Edencom side.
Like the Edencom standings right now, they give you literally nothing. We can't even really get our LP anymore because
the sites are kind of
the
gone.
sites are gone, right?
Oh, wild! What about your outfit?
So we did 5 months of an invasion, put thousands of hours individually into this, and all we got is this dumb T-shirt. But
yeah, totally.
Right. Well, at least since they forgot our LP store exists, they don't put the outfits on for free like they did for the Triglavians, right? Because the Triglavians, the one place they got screwed was their outfits were put in the LP store. So
yeah, I think that's the one thing you guys got on us.
yeah, so we can hold on to that outfit and sell it in a couple of years, but they did put the Triglavian outfits in the Triglavian LP store, and that's the one thing that's kind of really, really bad for the Triglavian.
As someone who didn't take part on either side of this battle just because of the war and things like that, it was quite nice that I could actually go and get a Triglavian outfit, which I think is really cool, and not actually have to spend billions in Jita.
Well, yeah, but
there are many Trig outfits, though. The one rewarded for the standings felt like it was going to be more of a trophy for the people who did the Trig content, given that eventually whatever Trig space came would be open to more people.
You know what's interesting on the flip side of this whole conversation? When I was speaking to Moldavius and Ashtarothi last night, is that they actually both kind of felt that the content and the progression of Trig Space felt a little incomplete, and there's not a lot going for it right now.
Say that, yeah.
So like right now, the only real meaningful PvE that Trig Space has is right now because the Triglavian Dreadnought, I forgot what it's called. There's their Netra.
There's their Netra, yeah.
There's flashpoints.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but from what I understand, those are few and far between. So what they told me was that essentially right now the only real way that they can make a significant amount of cash and capitalize on their their reward for making Trig Space is blitzing through in order to gather Zernitra parts, the blueprints for the Zernitra, and then trying to sell it on the market. But the problem is that basically everyone is doing that right now, and that's essentially crashing the market for Zernitras. And objectively, a large majority of players believe that the Zernitra is basically just a shiny toy, and there's no real strategic use for them.
Well,
yeah, the fact that the ship not only doesn't have any high-angle guns, but it also does not have Tech 2 weapons or a faction one or Tech 2 ammo or any of that kind of affects things a lot. Also, I have to take a phone call real quick. I'll be right back.
The Zenitra is not wonderful. We tried to take one into a World Arc site during the invasions. Couldn't take the gate. But like there are other ways. Like if they don't mind taking small hits to their Triglavian standing, they can run World Arcs, which drop slow selling but pretty decent loot, unless they've changed it since the POCFin update. But more importantly is that not everybody does everything they do just because it makes good ISK. Like we don't want to go fight the Triglavian players in POCFin because we can make good ISK there. We built these enemies up over the last 5 months, fighting against them in the invasions. We want to keep fighting against them because it was a good story, and now we wanted a chance to be the invaders. We wanted a chance to try to fight to get the systems that were taken back, and very little of the gripes about it is money based, I think.
Well, I mean, it's still, I feel like it's still an important thing to discuss.
That's fair.
When, you have essentially a region specifically dedicated for players who have to grind status in order for them to, get into the space that they are in. There's not a whole lot of, lucrative opportunities for them on the other side of the aisle. Yeah, sure. It's great to RP and have an immersive experience. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are still concerned about, okay, how am I going to fund my next excursion? How am I going to be able to do the things that I want to do at the end of the day?
I feel like if you have gate access, you can go around the circle and find all the good sites. And you can make a decent amount of money. And if you don't have gate access, you really can't make anything there, because you probably end up in a system with, like, at most one of the sites, and you can run that and then it's done.
Yeah. I think currently there are, I've seen a screenshot of vacuum clouds of Rorquals. Like there's like 12 to 15 Rorquals at a time going through the Ore noms in one particular system that are just absolutely, decimating these ores. Now, the only downside to these ores is that, number one, the stations don't have a baseline refinery rate of 50%. So unless somebody has plugged in a rig, or there's like a leftover Athenor or Tatara or something, most of these guys aren't going to be getting a huge bonus to the refinery rate. So, and it doesn't compress, so they would have to jump this ore out into an adjacent system with a citadel in order for them to get the bonus refinery rates and get kind of the more lucrative, minerals locked behind the rare ore in Trig space.
Wow. Sorry, I got disconnected there. I found my way back, but I was able to listen through my mobile phone. The wonders of technology. My big question for everybody really is, where was the CSM to foresee this sort of a problem? Do you think, is there any word on what input they had on trying to prevent?
CSM had absolutely no input.
Are there any CSMs that really care about anything like this? Because
I think CSM. I generally think CSM does care about this, considering it has such a large, large standing impact upon the game. And there were 2 Reddit posts that were done. One was by Laura Secco that I had on as a guest last night. Another was by a pro Edencom player who essentially, went through the gripes of
Cloak and Dagger put a really good post on Reddit. Elizabeth put a really good post on the official E forums about the gripes. So those 2 posts are definitely worth looking at. They explained it more, and it's obviously a written work and not talking off the cuff, but they explained it really, really well. And I'd point you to those 2 posts, Elizabeth on the official E forums, and then Cloak and Dagger on Reddit. And I very rarely look at Reddit, but that was actually a really good post.
But CSM was silent because they were in the dark, you think?
Yeah.
Or
I think part of
that
it was them being left in the dark, where there was already content that CCP was like, all right, this is happening no matter what, and they didn't really look for input as much. The benefits and negatives of that could be argued a lot, but I think that's kind of what happened.
okay.
Yeah, the on both of those Reddit posts, Torvald and a couple other CSMs specifically said we had no input whatsoever. We were just as shocked, if not, maybe a little more than you were on when those, when these things came out.
Yeah, to me it seems like the CSM is so focused on other things that, and then this
That the
big thing
Trig stuff
goes
wasn't
by.
really the focus for them.
Yeah, because they're not elected by Trig players or even EdenCom players. They're elected by masses of players that are fighting in this war, not in this.
As somebody who's outside of the big null blocks, I often don't take the CSM seriously. Like the player I really, really, really wanted to win CSM was Stitch Caneland, and last 2 elections he really hasn't. I think I might try to run at some point, but I do often feel discouraged as somebody who's not part of the null blocks about the CSM.
Just because of the structure of the election, right?
That's not to say there aren't great CSMs. I know quite a few of them, and they are great. But like, EVE is a really big game, and a lot of people focus on the areas they play, and that makes complete sense. And it just seems like the more organized and larger groups obviously can organize and outvote individuals and smaller groups.
Right. All right. Well, let's not spend too much time on that. What about this new? Well, we finished with Triglavian space. Anything else you guys wanted to talk about? It's a very big topic. We'll be talking about it forever now going forward. But anything specific?
I would say, to kind of summarize, and I encourage anybody listening to who wants to hear more about Triglavian space. I had a really good episode last night with a pretty large juggernaut cast of guests talking about Trig space and whatnot. But I would say, to summarize, a lot of the even the Triglavian players are, I would say, to put it modestly, mildly disappointed with the current release factor, but also hopefully optimistic that CCP will continue to iterate on what's going on and how things are going to go, and et cetera, and kind of expand on this and adjust it based upon the player base and how things evolve.
All right. Well, next we want to move on to something else that affects everybody. It's the new quadrant of development for EVE Online. It's called Phoenix. It's a great trailer that came out recently, and it looks like they're going to focus on supercarriers and make them centerpiece ships, which will allow them to respawn players into brand new ships after they've been killed or destroyed in combat.
Yeah, they're calling it a tactical clone bay, which I think is a neat way of taking things there, because supercarriers originally were intended to be something more akin to motherships, and with this, they really are sort of moving back into that role, and I think that's quite neat.
Yeah, I totally agree. You guys, do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I got some thoughts on it. I mean, in terms of mothershipness, this is neat. They're scaling up these supercarriers to a more proper size. If you guys remember when the Aeon became gigantic last month for suspectedly no reason, that's obviously
yeah,
something
somebody slipped up, right?
related to this. Yeah. And they are adding, they're going in and redoing the textures for all the different supercarriers. They're adding the detail shader that they have on Citadels and the other newer capital ships, which makes them have a lot more visual fidelity. Their size makes a lot more sense when you zoom in. They look bigger. And they're actually adding some new parts and changing a little bit on the Nix. So that's a good thing, too. They're just making them all look much better, making them all much bigger, and giving them, again, that tactical clone bay, which looks to be basically, if you're like, I'm assuming how it's going to work is if you're set to that clone bay, like during a fight, you can immediately, come back out of that supercarrier in a ship that is, staged within it. It can probably carry a bunch of ships and just send a bunch out.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see, or I'm curious that what managed to convince that CCP that super carriers need to be put into kind of a more long-range support role, because that's essentially what players have been saying about super carriers, and
For a long time, yeah.
for a
Yeah.
long time.
To relate this back to some of the Trig content as well, the Triglavian world arc is conceptualized as a mothership. Like if you look at its concept art, that's what it's called anyhow. And it sort of seems to play the same sort of role where it can, even the effect used on the ships that are spawning in the Phoenix trailer is somewhat similar to the one used by the world arc for spawning its extra features and stuff in the site it works at. And, the thing's obviously meant to be, hey, big mothership ship stock in it, they can come out of it. Or in the case of the world arc, it has a gate that's built into it and a bunch of ships can come through there. I think I wouldn't be surprised if some of the thoughts for, hey, let's do a mothership came after discussion about, oh, cool, a world arc. That's a mothership. Maybe we can make other ships more like motherships now.
It
Yeah.
also gives supercarriers a bit more of a niche role. At the moment, they're kind of in
Heavy
between.
carriers, yeah, that's all.
They're in between Dreadnoughts and Titans. They kind of just have the same use as both of them. Whereas now,
Yep.
with this new bay, it will allow them to be more tactical. You could have, if it's indeed setting your clone to a supercarrier, you could have a group of, say, interdictors set to a specific supercarrier who is filled with interdictor fit ships.
Yep.
One thing that McLeod has put up in the chat is it could also be something to reduce the server load, because over these last few weeks we have seen insane fights and insane numbers of ships dying. Each time that ship dies and the pod dies, he has to leave the node, reships, and then get bridged back into the system. That causes an increase in the performance hit. So could it be that having them on field would then mean that your fleets are able to reship quicker and it's able to get you continuing in the fight and could ultimately turn fights?
Absolutely, yeah.
The
A
use
more
of them.
tactical role. And I'm interested to see if that works out well. I'm wondering how they will, if at all, change their, defenses, and if they will, take away, say, light fighters and stuff from them, that sort of thing, or maybe give them a whole bunch of support fighters and no other real DPS, something like that.
Am I mistaken in thinking that the Rorqual is going to be changing too?
They haven't said anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if they went that way with it.
They did say something, but I don't think it was officially released. I think it was just part of a conversation about, I think it was when they announced the mineral changes, which also came in recently with the Triglavian space. There was a massive mineral redistribution. We've talked a lot about that in the past few weeks. And I think they did say they want to bring the Rorqual back, but in a different role. So I think what it should have been, it always had clone bays like the Titan did, so that you could have your clones in the industrial capital ship and mining ships in it as well. So you could literally carry your mining fleet with you in the Rorqual. So I wonder if it's going back to that sort of concept, which would fit very well with what's going on with super carriers.
I mean, say, imagine you do that and you put some combat ships in the work wall and someone kills, all the mining barges and suddenly they're in Ravens or something. Or something better, smaller.
I think it also fits into
industrials at the moment.
Slowly? Go ahead.
The Rorqual Bay can only carry industrials, and the limitation on the clone VAT Bay of someone who's recently used one, there is only a certain amount of clones you can actually put in it. I believe with max skills, I think you can only get 10. And a pilot has to initiate a jump clone to that structure. He doesn't respawn on it at all.
Yeah, see, that's the way it works currently. I'd say they're probably going in and changing a lot of that. And also, you're saying the Rorqual gets 10, right? Because I know Titans get a lot more.
Yeah, the max Rorqual I know, I believe, has 10. I'm not quite sure on Titan. I haven't got one fit.
Right.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens there. But this new quadrant is their development. Now, normally when they put out a trailer, they kind of preview the stuff they're building, or actually they're going to release. And they say the trailers are very accurate to what they promised to put into the game. And if you look back at the Eclipse trailer, pretty much everything they showed in there is now in the game, right? You saw the Edencom ships. You saw, there's a couple exceptions. You saw the bridges kind of failing and then collapse at the end there. So all that was teased is kind of delivered upon, with the one exception of that giant castle that Edencom ships were coming out of, it looked like.
So that station thing you see actually is the fully finished, at least conceptualized version of the new Jita station. And having a weird giant shadow pass over that thing in the trailer made a lot of people think, oh, wow, will Jita get invaded? Will that be like the big final thing of this? And, that didn't come to pass, but I wouldn't be surprised if they do something with that still in the future. And one of the other things they didn't that didn't show up, basically,
I think they
or
just wanted
didn't
to show the station.
present in the same way. Yeah, they definitely wanted to show it. In the Zenith trailer, you see the stars in the Trig systems collapse into, gargantuan Trig wormholes, basically, the conduit things. And that hasn't happened yet. But Trig Space also has more yet to come, especially... So, okay, in terms of, PvE and other money-making content, they really don't have anything. But in terms of story stuff, there's a lot more that's going to happen, because you have those giant gate things that I've posted some pictures of. I don't know if you've seen those on Twitter. Those things haven't fulfilled their function and role yet in the story. So,
yeah. So like Zenith, this new one, Phoenix, it's called, also shows and previews some stuff. They went out and said, yeah, we're going to change super carriers. Probably they're going to get bigger. Probably they're going to be.
They've already said they're going to be a lot bigger. They
did. Okay.
Had a little thing they wrote about that.
What else did we see in that video that is interesting that they say haven't talked about?
Nothing really. They showed at the very beginning the clogged up gates in the Trig systems. That's the only thing they really did about that. I did find it neat that they basically made fleet comps really accurate in that. CCP Aurora, I think I heard her say she was proud of having gotten that done. But I hadn't seen anything that didn't look like something we already knew, except for the super carriers.
What do you mean by fleet comms? I didn't catch that.
The fleet comps, the ships flying there.
Oh, composition.
And the way they were flying and stuff. They were meant to be more accurate to actual fleets.
Right.
As opposed to some of the more grand trailers, which, while they look cool, aren't as representative of how people fly the ships in game. But this one was pretty good with that.
Yeah. The trailer where it's just mutants.
Yeah.
That's true. They did have mutants in this one.
Yep.
All
like
right.
The Birth of the Capsuleer trailer also, that intro cinematic and / trailer. The combat stuff and that is also more towards that.
Okay, so we're gearing up now at this very moment to see another huge battle that's about to happen. It'll be starting in about anywhere from a half hour to an hour. I think the timer's not up for another 90 minutes, but fleets are already assembling. 1DQ, we hear, is already over 1,000, close to 1,500. So people are piling into the system in order to fight over a Keepstar, which was anchored really quickly yesterday and should be coming out for its online timer in just a few minutes. But let's go over last week, because not only was there a lot changing in the game, but players were up to a lot of combat, and we saw some stuff that was pretty impressive. But let me just give you the scale of what these fights look like. And I can't find my notes. Oh, here they are. Okay, so the first, about a week ago, was the Battle of 319 TAC, and that was 4,500 combatants over a period of, I think that one was about 6 hours. So it was considered 5-6 hours. So it was considered kind of a short battle. And then you had the Battle of YZ9, which had 3,400 in local. That's how many were peaking at local. How many players were in the system at the same time, or ships, just to be accurate. And that one had an incredible, what do we call it? Escalation path, right? With one group doing one thing and meeting a reaction of another. And so it was play, counterplay, counterplay. It went back and forth until there was an attempted boson trap, which is Titans that were logged off in system that were turned on all at the same time, they all returned to where they were when they logged off. It created a ball, and in the center of that ball was Pandemic Legion and Northern Coalition, I believe, Supercarrier Fleet. I think there was well over 100. I heard there was, I don't know how many were there, but hundreds. And they attempted to use doomsdays that created a damage over an area, but it didn't work out. Some people say that there were some problems with the server and the damage wasn't allocated properly. Other people say that they just missed a couple times, even though they had 20 Titans in that ball formation. It wasn't enough damage. Unless they all applied perfect damage, it wouldn't have been enough because the Nixes are very, very tanky ships. But it didn't work. And unfortunately, the price tag for trying it went up to 2.5 trillion for the Imperium, which was a huge bill. But on the other hand, Pappy lost over 200 dreadnoughts, I think, which is a pretty big dreadnought bill to pay. So then, after that, very soon after that, on Friday, 319 lights up again, and another Keepstar is anchored, and it makes its anchor, and then the battle for the destruction of it before it onlines happened, and that was another 10, what was that? Sully, how long was that? 10, 20, 10, 15, sorry, 10, 11 hours?
So we've had 14-hour fights, 5-hour fights. We had a 10-hour fight not yesterday, day before.
Yeah.
So
that was 5,400 players in that fight yesterday. And I think that one got over 1.2 trillion for the Imperium side of things. Again, I don't mention Pappy numbers because Pappy is destroying ships, but Imperium is destroying the Keepstar. That's mainly where the focus of damage is. So Pappy comes out kind of unscathed, whereas Imperium is footing this huge bill to win these wars. And you could say they have amazingly deep pockets and they can do this all day long, and they're just enjoying ticking off how many Keepstars they're destroying. That's from their perspective. But Pappy, on the other hand, is saying, no, this is great. We're bleeding them out of their fortune. We're bleeding them out of their military capability. This is our plan. So those are the two sides. And then today we hear Initiative is reducing their SRP to as much as 50%, but it depends on the ship. And that is taken by Pappy's side as a sign that their strategy is working. Now, McLeod's actually in Initiative. I'll just speak for him here. He can correct me if I'm inaccurate. But Initiative covers part of the SRP as an alliance, but corporations in Initiative will also cover some SRP, maybe making up for the shortfalls and that sort of thing. But yeah, so that's the situation we're at now. And another battle, another Keepstar has been put down, and that comes out in just a few minutes, about 90 minutes. So we're looking at another long, massive battle. What do you think, Sully?
Yeah, so numbers are growing exponentially in both systems. The Keepstar time is actually 57 minutes at the moment. So we've started to see pings out from both sides beginning to do their form-ups. At the moment in 1DQ for the Imperium, there is 1,800 pilots. And in 8QT for Pappy forces, there is currently 3,200 pilots.
Right. That's kind of been that's been the ratio more or less for these fights, right? Like a 2-to-1, maybe 2.5 to 1.
Yeah. With the Imperium having home field advantage, they're able to reship. There's, for example, Pappy staging. During the first Keepstar battle, there was no strontium on market. So if anyone wanted to reship in a dreadnought, they couldn't then jump in and go into siege. Whereas with the Imperium and their home field advantage, they have large stockpiles of these sort of things. As we saw on the last fight, where they just kept throwing in and bridging in ravens after ravens, interdictors just constantly just keep funneling the ships in.
Right. So it's been an amazingly dense week of really high scale fighting, stuff we haven't seen since 2018, but we have never seen it in this succession. We're talking major fight after major fight after major fight now for a week straight. It's really started about 2 weeks ago, but it's really accelerating.
You know, from the outside looking in, this almost looks like each side is trying to call each other's bluff as to who can form up the most and continue to actually put down these keep stars, and essentially who has the resources and the wherewithal in order to keep up this fight.
Yeah, and it was noted as well through Eve's the Eve map and stuff. They saw that 1DQ had 1,500, I believe, 1,100 or 1,500 industry jobs installed in the last 24, 48 hours. So the Imperium industrial side is really trying to keep up with the demand, especially with the amount of ravens and things like that are very effective at doing damage to the Keep Star. It's just consistently trying to keep fleet stocked up.
Got those anvils cracking, boy.
Yeah, the builders must be going crazy trying to keep up with demand. I mean, yesterday or a couple days ago, the big ship that was destroyed were ravens as the Imperium tried to destroy the Keep Star mainly with ravens. How many ravens ended up being destroyed in that one battle?
I have a summary here. Let me just check. Will it do a breakdown? Just need to find it on this list.
My guess is, I think we asked people to guess. That was kind of part of our games, but I think it was, I want to say it was 1,700 or 1,500.
1,614, I'm seeing here.
I guessed well. That was before I saw people in chat speaking up. So what we're going to do after this show immediately is go into live coverage with Sully. One of the cool things that we've been able to do, besides have Elise Randolph there talking about what was going on, some of the real key tactics that are at work, some of the key strategies. We really look at it at different layers. We talk about what the FCs are doing, what ships they're using, how those compositions work against one another, what the moves are, what the counter moves are. But then we also talk about the server health and the what we call weather, the things that FCs can't really depend on. They just have to suffer through. And we talk about that. We talk about the finances that might be, the theoretical finances that might be behind both these sides. I don't think throwing a lot of money at war can go on forever. So that is going to play a role. It just depends on what those stockpiles look like, what your income looks like, what your resources acquisition rate is, and what your building rate is. And then on top of all that, another thing that's considered weather is, what mood your people are in, what mood your players are in. Are they having a good time? Do they feel successful? And that's a test of leadership, and we've had a lot of that. So in addition to that, what you're seeing is some of the pictures from Razorian, who hangs out with us too. He's part of TIS, and he goes out and takes these beautiful pictures of war for the community. You can use them as desktops and stuff, and he has a Flickr. So he hangs out with us, takes some pictures, hands them to us, and we preview them. And that's how we spend the time, because it's, a lot of hours going through these wars. So if you want to hang out with us, we're going to start live coverage in a little bit. But if you're listening to this as a podcast, we will have a lot of this stuff on YouTube under Live Battles playlist. You can check that out. It's the full beginning to end coverage, and it has all the pictures in there. For Razorians, that's your Titan right there. I just saw it pass by.
Yeah, it was
Sully.
in all her glory, getting Doomsdays off.
Yeah. So for Razorian's artwork, you can find him at Razorian at Flickr. That's where he keeps his library. You can see them there. And but also you can find him on Talking in Stations Discord. So great. I think we're gearing up now. One last thing. If you like these epic battles and you want to get caught up, like you want to know what everybody else knows that's playing, that's been here for 10 years, there is a book out. It is for, right now, it's just for Kickstarter people who helped out. Empire's EV Volume 2, written by Andrew Groen. That book is coming out to people who helped out. So expect it to come to you at some point. But you will be able to purchase that book off Amazon later this year, probably in the November time period. And I recommend that you get that book and read it cover to cover. You will get caught up on a ton of history and all the players that were building the world back then. All the young people that were coming out, the new FCs like Pro God Legend, they're all in charge of FCing in these big fights now. So you can see how they started and where their roots are, and you can see who their mentors were, who their teachers were, and who their heroes were. There's a real clear distinction, or a clear link between that book and what's going on now. So it's very, very relevant, and it's also a very exciting book to read because a lot of the stuff's recognizable. You'll see YTAC 2A and O in there. You'll see 49U in there. These systems are historic, and you can see why in these books. But you'll also be able to measure up what's going on now compared to what was going on back then. So it's really a good idea to contrast your current situation with the historic situation. Okay. That's my diatribe. I just want to get through that quickly. Do you guys have anything else that you wanted to bring up?
Not really. I think we covered a lot of stuff already.
Less than 2 weeks till Twitch versus Eve.
Oh, what's that?
It's a yearly event. Twitch versus Eve 4 is coming up. A bunch of streamers and CCP and so on. We all fleet together. We go out under a variety of FCs and one at a time. Like an FC will bring the fleet out, we all die, and another FC will bring the fleet out, we all die. Once again, I am one of the FCs this year, so watch Twitch for that. Stream Fleet runs it regularly. It's a really, really fun event.
Cool.
And any streamer of any size of Eve is invited to participate.
Oh, that's great. All right. God, what a dense week with stuff happening. Massive permanent game changes in the game with the Triglavian stuff, an announcement of what's to come, and then, of course, players going to war in a big way. And there's a ton of stuff happening that we're not able to cover, unfortunately, because we're busy with other stuff, but there's a ton of stories in EVE Online that are constantly happening out there. All right, Arcia, thanks so much for being here. And Uriel, thanks for coming by. Really appreciate it. And totally. Of course, Tiberius. Yeah. And McLeod and Sully, thank you for putting in those long hours with me and Elise and others. Can you preview what we're going to see today?
So today's is going to be a very interesting one because someone noted out in chat earlier, and I think this is why KZ9 was chosen. Imperium do not have a Fortizar in this system. They have Astra houses and other structures. But there isn't anything that can clear bubbles off a grid. So an Astra house can't use a point defense module and basically mini smart bomb the grid to remove bubbles. So if they use the same tactic before as warping in dreadnoughts, it is possible that they could get caught on the structure. So as we've seen previously, the dreadnoughts warping in towards the end of the fight have been what have been able to keep it paused. That could well be different in this situation because they don't have that safety net. But in terms of tactics, I would imagine the Imperium will probably show up with another Raven fleet, followed by their Jackdaws and various changes. The carriers were really effective. Yesterday they did lose a lot of them, but they did also apply a large amount of damage. So I'm wondering if we will see any new developments on that tactic. But at the moment, it's very interesting because we are in prime EU time zone, heading into the US. So how this fight develops out could be interesting to say the least.
Yeah, a lot of the fights that we've been seeing have been US time zone. They've been fought by the US players mostly. So this will be a different crew plus US time zone will be around. Well, it's the weekend, so they'll be around too. This is just going to be a gigantic fight. My God.
And if I'm not mistaken as well, I believe this is the first Keep Star with the test ticker that has been anchored in Delve. We've had Fraternity, Pandemic Horde, but I don't believe we've had a Test Alliance one so far.
Yeah. Well, Fraternity has been putting down a lot of them because they've been putting them down in their time zone where they had an advantage. But that strategy seems to have stopped. I think Pappy is probably happy with the amount of numbers they get. So they're not afraid of being overwhelmed or trying to take advantage of overwhelming the Imperium's numbers. That's probably why now Fraternity is no longer putting them down. It's now Test, or we'll see if it starts to become a hodgepodge of different groups putting them down. Well, okay, that's it for us today. This is going to be very interesting. We're going to shift into live footage. When are we going to start that, Sully?
Probably in around about 15 minutes. Gives us time to set up and make sure we're ready.
Yeah. All right. So thanks again, everyone, the crew here, and you guys watching. We'll be back in about 15 minutes with some live coverage as we start out this next big battle. What an impressive week in EVE Online. Let's see what the next week looks like. Until then, that's all for Talking in Stations. We'll see you next time.